Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a strong Georgia Tech welcome to Mr. Raymond Baker.
Thank you, Carl, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here back on the Georgia Tech campus, as I've had the opportunity to be a number of times. It's always a great thrill. Georgia Tech's a fantastic institution. I enjoyed every minute that I was at Georgia. We did have Saturday classes. You don't have Saturday classes, do you? We had Saturday classes. That we didn't enjoy, but other than that, Georgia Tech was great fun and a superb learning experience. Let me elaborate a bit more on where I'm coming from. After I finished graduate school at Harvard, I taught business management at the University of New Hampshire while I was thinking about what did I want to do with my life. And I decided to get a taste of international business without making any sort of long-range commitment to it. Just decided to get a taste of international business. I made application to 200 companies in the United States. I got offers to go to Iran, Nigeria, and Brazil. I chose Nigeria because it was a newly independent country. It was English speaking, and I could walk off the airplane and start managing a business. After 2 years of running a company for my employer, I decided I could do on my own what I was doing for them. I came back to the United States, established my own company, got engaged, and returned to Nigeria and opened my own office. First 2 years were a great struggle. But I finally started buying small and medium-sized companies that I could afford to buy. I made my biggest acquisitions in the midst of the Nigerian Civil War. That's the Biafran conflict. When other people who were much smarter than me were selling out, I was buying their businesses. I came out at the end of the Civil War with 2 manufacturing companies and a trucking business and a financial holding company and a consulting practice on the side. And it was all great fun. We were doing leverage buyouts before they were called leverage buyouts. I borrowed a lot of money and expanded my businesses and had a ball doing it. At least I had a ball doing it up until the mid-1970s. And by that time, Nigeria was becoming so corrupt that it wasn't a whole lot of fun. So my wife and I and 2 young children moved back to the States. I set up a trading company and did business all over the rest of the developing world for another 20 years. Retained some of my interest in Nigeria, and indeed sold my last investment in Nigeria only 3 years ago. But after 35 years in business, 15 in Nigeria and 20 doing business all over the developing world, I realized that I had seen more corruption and more money laundering and more financial crime and more tax evasion than any one person should see in a lifetime. And so I decided to say what I had to say about this phenomenon. I segued into the think tank world as a guest scholar at the Brookings Institution, wrote a book on this subject matter, and then established Global Financial Integrity to continue researching and addressing the problems that we are focused on. Now, my experiences are very unique and quite different from the experiences of most people. You've had some powerful speakers in this series. I guess Al Gore has spoken, Warren Buffett has spoken. So I've tried to figure out what can I say to you that might be meaningful. I'm going to set an ambitious objective here. I'm going to try to convey something to you that I hope you will think about for the rest of your lives. Inequality. Global inequality. What you have here are 2 bar charts depicting the two usual ways of measuring global income. One is based on purchasing power parity, and the other one on currency exchange rates. Currency exchange rates means what you can get when you go to a bank and change money. Purchasing power parity means what that local currency will buy in the local market. Two different ways of measuring global income. Each color in these bar charts represents 20% of the world's population. Look at how much of global income flows to the top 20% and how little of global income is available to the bottom 80% of the world's population. We're talking about 70 to 90% of global income accruing to the top 20%, leaving only 10 to 30% of global income for the bottom 80% of the world's population. Now, you may have seen some articles lately saying that poverty is declining, and this does appear to be correct. Poverty of the poorest people living on $1 to $2 a day seems to be moderating. However, inequality is not moderating. The disparity between rich and poor, by every available analysis, is in fact widening. Not only in the developing countries, but also in the Western countries, and indeed between Western countries and other countries also. Okay, you might think, those at the bottom of the income scale, they are uneducated, they live in corrupt countries, the environmental conditions in those countries are appallingly tough. None of this is my responsibility. None of this is our responsibility. Well, that's not quite right. Let me explain a little bit what I mean by this. In our think tank, we study the flow of illicit money out of developing countries. How much flows out of developing countries into the richer world? This is the reality with which we deal. For the last 3 years, for which data is available, 2007, 8, and 9, illicitly generated money coming out of poorer countries into richer countries, we estimate at about, has averaged about $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year of illicitly generated money coming out of poorer countries into richer countries. Compare this to foreign aid. We like to think that we are a generous people, giving away foreign aid to poorer countries. In our analysis, looking at the $120 billion a year that foreign aid has been running in recent years, in our analysis, the illicit outflow of money is about 8 to 10 times the total amount of foreign aid flowing into the poorer countries. There is no way to make this formula work for anyone, rich or poor. This phenomenon undermines much of what we're trying to accomplish in the foreign aid agenda. This money flows out through 3 means: corrupt, criminal, and commercially tax evading. The corrupt component is bribery and theft by government officials. The criminal component is drug trading and human trafficking and racketeering and counterfeiting and contraband and so forth that has exploded over the last quarter century. The commercial component is commercial tax evasion, in which we in the Western countries are certainly very much involved. Now, a lot of people think that this phenomenon is primarily about corruption in those corrupt countries over there. In our analysis, the corrupt component, the component that stems from bribery and theft by government officials, and remember, I'm talking about the cross-border flow of money here. The corrupt component is about 3% of the global total. The criminal component is about 30 to 35% of the global total, and the commercially tax evading component is about 60 to 65% of the global total. That's the part of this problem in which Western companies and indeed local entrepreneurs are involved. The commercial component is by far the largest. In our analysis, this reality is the most damaging economic condition hurting the global poor. It drains hard currency reserves, heightens inflation, reduces tax collection, cancels investment, and undermines free trade. Nothing in our judgment is so damaging to the developing countries as this: money pouring out of the poorer countries into our richer economies. Okay, you might think, well, that's still not our responsibility. We can't help it if those countries want to deposit their money into our richer economies. We can't help that. That's, you know, it's still not our responsibility. Well, that also is not quite correct. We have created a global shadow financial system comprising a number of elements. Tax havens are a principal part of this system. Tax havens are places where you can set up an entity and then you can channel revenues and profits through those entities, and they will pay little or no taxes on those revenues flowing through the tax haven. When I started out in business in the beginning of the 1960s, there were 4 or 5 tax havens around the world. Today, there are more than 60. This has been a burgeoning phenomenon, with tax havens being established all over the globe. Most of these tax havens also function as secrecy jurisdictions. What that means is they have the infrastructure of lawyers and bankers and accountants who can set up disguised corporations behind nominees and trustees, such that no one knows who are the real owners of the business. They are unknown as to who owns it. There are millions and millions of such entities around the world now. Disguised corporations are a feature of the global shadow financial system. Anonymous trust accounts are part of this structure. That is a trust account where whoever has established the trust is unknown. It's hidden behind nominees and trustees. Fake foundations are part of this structure. You can create a charitable foundation. You can donate money to this charitable foundation, and then you can designate yourself as the beneficiary of the charity of that foundation, paying no taxes anywhere along the way. This is a particular feature in Liechtenstein and in Panama in the use of this structure. False documentation is used in all sorts of trade and capital transactions. False pricing in imports and exports is by far the biggest part of this structure. It accounts for the fact that 60 to 65% of the cross-border flow of illicitly generating money stems from tax evasion. You can falsify the price of what you're importing or the price of what you're exporting and shift money across borders in violations of the laws of the country in question. And then there are various money laundering techniques that can be utilized for special purposes. And finally, there are holes left in the laws of Western countries that facilitate the movement of money through this shadow financial system and ultimately into our Western economies. For example, in the United States, it remains legal to bring from abroad proceeds generated criminally from handling stolen property and counterfeiting and contraband and credit fraud and environmental crimes and all forms of tax evading money and so forth. That can be brought legally into the United States. Various other countries have other loopholes in their laws. Now, this system was developed primarily over the past 50 years or so. As I said, there were only a handful of tax havens at the beginning of the 1960s. But the 1960s were the decade when the development of this system took off in earnest for two reasons. One, it was the decade of decolonization. And two, it was the decade when multinational corporations started planting their flags all across the planet. In respect to decolonization, a lot of the economic and political elites in these newly independent countries wanted to take their money out by any means possible, and we in the West service that desire with a great deal of energy and creativity, helping that flight capital move out of poorer countries into our Western economies. The spread of multinational corporations is another reason for the growth of this system, with many corporations utilizing tax evading, aggressive tax avoidance techniques, and in some cases, money laundering techniques to shift money abroad. This system was created primarily to move flight capital out of poorer countries, capital that wanted to flee from those countries, and tax evading money across borders. And this structure performs that task very effectively and very efficiently. It does exactly what it was designed to do. Okay, well, you might think that this is the way the world works. This is too big a problem to solve. There's nothing we can do about this. We just have to live with this reality. Well, that also is not quite right. We can indeed curtail the illicit money that comes out of the poorer countries. And curtail is the operative word. We should not be trying to stop this, which would require draconian measures, but curtailing it can be accomplished. And I want to address this question on two levels. One, the practical, and secondly, the philosophical or intellectual level. First of all, the practical level. We can get rid of each of these elements of the global shadow financial system with some pretty straightforward measures. Tax havens. We can advise tax havens such as the Cayman Islands and Jersey and Guernsey and indeed the state of Delaware and other such places that, sorry, you cannot handle proceeds coming in and out of there unless you can demonstrate that the appropriate amount of taxes have been paid on those proceeds flowing in and out. Secondly, disguised corporations, which are a big part of this. This is particularly easy to solve. You can set up a disguised corporation if you want to, but then we can require financial institutions to know who are the natural persons that own every account in their banks. It doesn't do you any good to have a disguised corporation if your bank tells you we have to know who are the natural persons that own the account. There's a huge effort underway to get this kind of information required in all countries of the world. Getting rid of disguised corporations is a no-brainer. This is not difficult to do. The same thing is true of anonymous trust accounts and fake foundations. Falsified pricing in imports and exports is more difficult to curtail, but as I was talking with some students earlier today, it can be done with some available techniques. For one of these techniques is world market pricing data that is becoming increasingly available online, so that customs officials and ports officials in developing countries with an iPad can access immediately what is the normal world market price for this item that we're sitting here. And if you are looking at the item and the invoice and you see that it is substantially out of line, you can question why. This kind of data is becoming available. Money laundering is we are attempting to curtail it, not very effectively yet, but the global anti-money laundering organization called the Financial Action Task Force just last month designated or indicated that from henceforward countries that adopt anti-money laundering policies should make tax evasion a criminal offense under their statutes. Should be what is called a predicate offense for a money laundering charge. So that is progressing. And then finally, the loopholes that are left in Western laws, we need to harmonize anti-money laundering regulations among countries so that we close some of these loopholes. None of this is rocket science. All of these techniques that are necessary to curtail the flow of illicitly generated money out of developing countries are pretty straightforward. It is not that difficult technically to accomplish this. It is a matter of political will. I work every day on building the political will to address the curtailment of these kinds of flows. Okay, second, that was the practical level. Second, let's address this on the intellectual or philosophical level. And first of all, let me dispense with the question of greed. A lot of people think what I'm talking about is just greed, and greed's been around for a long time. It's not just greed. Greed implies that you know you are doing something wrong or something that is entirely self-serving. I've known lots of people who function in that shadow financial system that I didn't think were greedy, and I don't think they thought they were greedy. They thought they were doing the right thing. The right thing is, in their judgment, to take money out of places where it can be lost due to wastage or inefficiency, and bring that money to places where it can be safe and secure and can grow and can contribute to global prosperity. How did we get to the point of thinking that this is the right thing to do? We certainly did not learn this from Adam Smith. Adam Smith, as I'm sure you recall, wrote the book Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, the same year as the Declaration of Independence in the United States, so that the two seminal documents that laid out the principles for the democratic capitalist system appeared in the same year. In Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith sets forth what he thinks are the ways to accomplish a free market system that can generate economic progress and prosperity for all people. But Adam Smith's first commitment and his first interest was in moral philosophy. Before he wrote Wealth of Nations, 17 years earlier, he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in this book, he laid out the core characteristics of sympathy and sincerity that he believed were needed for people to operate in narrow communities and in larger societies. Adam Smith stressed compassion in suffering and empathy for others. He wanted and he envisioned people who would be upright and principled and conscientious and trustworthy, people of sincerity and sympathy. And these were the kinds of people that he felt could successfully operate the free market system that he talked about in Wealth of Nations. Throughout both of Adam Smith's books, Wealth of Nations and Theory of Moral Sentiments, at every juncture where he had to decide between the interest of the rich versus the interest of the poor, he opted for the interest of the poor and the weak. He revised both of his books repeatedly through his life. And at every juncture, at every point in both of his books, he opted for the interest of the poor and the weak. Today's reality, with a great deal of wealth accruing to the top, while billions of people around the world live in poverty, is precisely the outcome that Adam Smith tried to avoid. What happened? In the early years of the Industrial Revolution, budding capitalists found much more appealing the ideas of a different gentleman, Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham was the chief proponent of the philosophy of utilitarianism, the philosophy that says the principal goal of society should be maximizing the total advantages across the society. Bentham was basically concerned about the greatest good for the greatest number. That's often quoted as the fundamental principle of utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. In Bentham's view, society should be all about maximizing the total advantages across the whole of the society. Bentham goes on to say, make sacrifice of the happiness of a few to the greater happiness of the rest. You can dispense with some people within his utilitarian philosophy, and you can use them to advance the total advantages of society. Now, these were ideas that these young capitalists could embrace. Life is all about maximizing. Selective sacrifice of the interest of some people is acceptable. Ends justify means. Whatever you have to do to accomplish this maximization is justified. Distribution within the society is not important. It's the tops of those bar charts. It's the total amount of wealth and happiness and advantage for the society that is important. Distribution within the society is not important. And furthermore, human rights can be subordinated to the interest of maximizing. Jeremy Bentham's utilitarian ideas shriveled the influence of Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. Emanating from Jeremy Bentham, there arose a capitalism, utilitarianism union that has lasted now for 200 years. And in that process, it has rather effectively reduced further developments in moral philosophy for much of that period, indeed for about 175 years, until the 1970s. In 1971, a Harvard professor named John Rawls wrote a book entitled A Theory of Justice. And in this book, he takes on the notion that maximizing should be the first goal of society. He takes it on frontally. In Rawls's words, each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of society as a whole cannot override. Each person possesses this inviolability, and the interest of society as a whole cannot override this concern. In other words, he's tackling the maximizing idea frontally. He's saying, no, society's first order, its first commitment, should not be to maximizing. It should be to justice. Rawls offers a thought experiment. If you could bring together a group of people and have them set aside whatever intellectual or cultural baggage they bring to the discussion, if you could bring together a group of people to negotiate the terms of their existence, they would never come up with the system that we have at the present time. They would never come up with a system that would disadvantage, for example, 4 out of 5 people in order that 1 out of 5 could be advantaged. They would never come up with a system that says life is all about maximizing. They would come up with a system that stresses justice for each individual as being the first goal of society. This is an absolutely stunning concept, taking utilitarianism to task right at its core beliefs, taking the maximizing notions to task right at the core. The last 4 decades have been the most fertile period in history for the development of theories of justice, theories that seek to displace the priority of maximizing with the priority of justice as the first commitment of society. When we embrace maximizing as the first of our priorities, we inevitably focus on maximizing what we can see, maximizing our own advantages, maximizing what is of greatest advantage to ourselves and our families and our companies and our countries. The shadow financial system, which I have described to you, is in fact the legitimization of illegality in the name of maximizing. It is the embodiment of injustice. Bentham's flawed idea of maximizing the greatest good for the greatest number has instead contributed to the greatest good for a small number. With John Rawls and others, the capitalism-utilitarianism union is under attack, but the capitalists themselves have not noticed. The Great 21st Century Transition, the title of my talk, has to be toward a more equitable world. This is unsustainable. This cannot last. A world of 8 or 9 billion people during your lifetimes with this level of disparity among its citizens is a world that is fraught with risk, a world that will be unstable and insecure. This has to change. Inequality and the need to change this reality. This is the idea that I would like to leave with you and convey to you in the hopes that you might think about it the rest of your lives. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You indicated that that these cash outflows from the developing countries into the Western countries that are illicit or legal amount to about maybe 1.2, 1.3 trillion dollars per year. Yet the disparity is far greater than that. When you look at your chart, it's in the I don't know, 50 or 60 trillion dollar per year. So clearly, just dealing with these illicit funds is not the answer, or clearly not the total answer. So, how would you anticipate that this income inequality actually be alleviated over the next century?
Well, clearly, where we're coming from is the need to make the address of the problem a two-way street. We need to recognize that we have a role to play in maximizing development for poorer countries. We need to get our act together and stop being so receptive to this money. That's where we're coming from. There are a lot of other aspects to the development equation that I'm not including here. And we're not trying to suggest that this is a total solution to the problem. I am trying to suggest that foreign aid, which is running at about 120 billion a year, is being badly offset by the illicit money that is coming out of developing countries. Incidentally, the community of economic development scholars, indeed the World Bank and USAID and others, were at first opposed to our analysis. We've been doing this kind of analysis for 5 years now. They were at first opposed to it because they thought that it was a threat to foreign aid. What's the point of 120 billion to foreign aid going in if 1.2 trillion of illicit money turns around and comes back out again? We were not trying to threaten foreign aid. It's taken us up until, it's just in the past year that we have gotten the development community to understand what we're talking about. And they have now embraced what we're talking about. UN Development Program is totally on our side. USAID gets what we're talking about. A great many developing countries get what we're talking about. We've had a breakthrough, but it took really 5 years to get the development community to think about what we're talking about.
Yes. What are the challenges when you're trying to convince lawmakers to make some of the changes you lined out ahead of time or before this, when some of the companies that pay for their campaigns or something have vested interest in this illegal money? And how do you overcome those challenges?
You hit the nail on the head. The major problem is we in the West, in the Western countries, United States and Europe, we like the money that comes out of other places into our coffers. We try to make the point that this is counterproductive, not productive. As I've indicated, this level of disparity cannot go on. This has to change. But it's a process of trying to appeal to closing the loopholes that facilitate this money. And interestingly, the major impetus to this has come over the last 15 years or so as we see the Western countries concerned about their own loss of tax revenues, their own loss of capital flowing out of Western countries, which has been fairly substantial. It is what has opened up this dialogue is in part our seeing how it affects us. Indeed, the financial crisis of the past 3.5 years has its roots very much in the shadow financial system. Not completely, but in good part in the shadow financial system. And we've been able to make the case that that was punitive to Western interest. That doesn't mean we've won the fight. It's chipping away at what has become normalized in the international movement of money and in the activities of multinational corporations. It's a steady process of chipping away. And we have made substantial progress. 5 years ago, the words illicit financial flows were not on the table. They were not in the political economy vocabulary. We have succeeded in getting those words into the political economy vocabulary. In the words of many organizations and people, right up to the G20 and the UN and Hillary Clinton and the OECD and IMF and so forth. The next step, having gotten those words into the vocabulary, is to continue to make progress in curtailing these flows. We are making a good bit of progress, a great deal of progress.
Mr. Baker, I'm Matias Micheloni. I'm an exchange student from Argentina. I wanted to ask you a question. I know lots of adults in Argentina who pay 44% income tax. And I wanted to ask you, is this a viable way to solve this inequality you're talking about? And what do you say to these kind of people to convince them that it's not crazy to pay this amount?
Argentina is an interesting example. As you know, Argentina dollarized its economy in the early 1990s. It made the dollar and the peso fully convertible. You could walk into a bank with an armload of pesos and exchange them for dollars, no record of who you were or anything else. Argentina did that partly because it thought that this would curtail the outflow of money from the country. It did not particularly curtail. It did to a certain extent, but not to a great extent did it curtail the outflow of money from Argentina. And the reason for that is because if there's someone in a developing country that wants to get their money abroad, they're going to do it as secretly as possible, and the mispricing of trade is the easiest way to do it, such that nobody else needs to know that you're doing it. I could give you a technical explanation of that, but the mispricing of trade is the easiest way to do it. Let's talk about tax levels and disparity and so forth. Do you know what country has the highest standard of living in the world? Among real countries. Norway. Norway has a tax rate of about 45%. Norway has an extraordinarily high tax rate, and at the same time, a low level of disparity between rich and poor, and at the same time, the highest standard of living in the world. How does it do this? It does this by having an egalitarian society in which everybody's pretty well turned on to the progress of their country. They're also blessed to have a great deal of oil coming out of the North Sea, which facilitates it. But what an interesting case. I go to Norway frequently because Norway is a major funder of what we do. And every time I go into Oslo, I look around and I say, my goodness, 45% taxes gets you a lot. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. And it has the highest standard of living in the world. How do you do that? How do you put together a high tax rate and the highest standard of living in the world? You do it with a very responsible government that takes those tax revenues and spends them very well. I'm not suggesting the United States could get away with a 45% tax rate, though it had higher than that in World War II when we were totally focused on winning that conflict. But that wouldn't fly today.
Hi, Mr. Baker. My name is Francis. I'm a current student here in the College of Management. My question kind of has to deal with the Task Force for Financial Integrity and Economic Development. After just sort of researching it very basically, I realize it's pretty new. But I'm really curious to hear about, the fact that it is a public and private partnership between organizations and governments. And sort of if you could talk about the success that you've had with that and maybe the challenges that you see with this sort of an organization that seeks to include both sides of those two very different areas of concern.
5 years ago, a number of civil society organizations, of which we were one, and a number of governments held a series of 3 meetings in which we talked about this phenomenon, illicit money flowing out of developing countries and the harm that does to those countries and the way that undermines foreign aid for the richer countries. We had 3 meetings, and at the end of those 3 meetings, the decision was made to form the Task Force on Financial Integrity and Economic Development. We were selected to direct the task force. The task force comprises 7 civil society organizations, I think 11 governments, and a foundation. The civil society organizations are our organization, Global Financial Integrity, Global Witness, Transparency International, Christian Aid, Tax Justice Network, Tax Research LLC, and Eurodad, the civil society organizations. The governments include Norway, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, Spain, Chile, India, Canada, South Africa, and so forth. And we continue to add to the governments all the time. In addition, the Ford Foundation is a member. We are a task force. What we, the civil society organizations, ask of the governments is permit us to pursue aggressively greater transparency in the global financial system for the purpose of addressing this problem. We do not ask governments to agree to everything that we're putting on the table. What we ask them to do is agree that we can be out in front on these issues. We can take the leading role in advocating these efforts. And this has worked. Governments are prepared to let us get out in front. It is an interesting consortium. It is not an easy consortium to run, but we've been quite successful in working with governments to address the kinds of issues that we're focused on. Basically, we're focused on transparency, the need for greater transparency by getting rid of the shadow financial system and focusing on transparency. The task force has been working very effectively.
Hi, so my name is Kayla McGee. I'm a third-year industrial engineering student. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind expanding upon your involvement in the Annex Society here at Georgia Tech.
I didn't get your question.
Oh, I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind expanding upon your involvement in the Annex Society here at Georgia Tech.
What was I involved in at Georgia Tech?
Well, involved. The Annex Society? I was just wondering what you were involved in within that society, like what you did in the society. If you
In ANAC?
Yes, sir.
I understand ANAC is a secret now. It wasn't when I was here. We didn't really do anything. It was just, it was just an honor to be brought into ANAC and ODK. Do you still have ODK, Omicron Delta Kappa? You still have ODK? We didn't really do anything in ANAC. It was an honor. I understand it's a secret society now. I have no idea what they do. It's a secret.
Hi, I'm Mike Valagurski. I'm a senior studying management here at Georgia Tech. I was wondering, through your work with GFI and the task force, I know there was a decline in illicit flows in 2009. I was wondering, have you had a measurable impact on the illicit flows, specifically the commercial illicit flows out of the developing nations, like as a result of your work?
I don't think we've got a measurable impact yet, but we certainly have a lot of countries adopting our agenda. I've just returned from Africa 10 days ago, in which we've gotten a whole continent turned on to our agenda. 2 years ago, we wrote a report, Illicit Financial Flows Out of Africa. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, based in Addis Ababa, took up the report and has moved it through the African ministers, finance and development ministers, and to a what we call the high-level panel that is taking this issue much, much further. I was in South Africa. The high-level panel is chaired by former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. For the first time, we've got a continent turned on to what we're talking about. That's progress. We did a report on India a year and a half ago. At first, the Indian illicit financial flows out of India. At first, the Indian government was dismissive of the report, saying this can't be right. But with an enormous amount of press commentary on our report, the Minister of Finance reversed himself after a month and named 3 Indian institutions to do the same analysis again and see if they come up with similar figures. And since then, India has joined the task force and is very much involved with us. In January, we released our report on Mexico. Mexico, we estimate, has had $50 billion a year disappearing out of there roughly since the year 2000. Our analysis went back much earlier than that. But just since 2000, over that decade, about $50 billion a year. And about 60% of that, we estimate, came to the United States. Mexico's in the throes of an election. It's a little bit difficult to get them to focus on it. However, Mexico is requesting of the United States automatic exchange of tax information back and forth between the United States and Mexico. The United States has had this with Canada for many years. Mexico has had it with Canada in recent years, but the United States and Mexico have not made this arrangement. So we certainly encourage Mexico to push very, very hard to have this accomplished as soon as possible. The next meeting of the G20 heads of state will be in Mexico in 3 months or so, and we hope that they will continue to push. But each of the countries that we've worked with has taken elements of what we're talking about and moved them forward.
Hi, my name is Mark Gurvich. I'm a third-year industrial engineering student. Recently, Italy made the decision to allow for the repatriation of illegal funds that were abroad, and they, even though they hadn't been taxed originally, there was a small fee if they brought them back into the country. I mean, Italy is a part of the developed world. Do you think certain similar policies might help countries in the developing world to allow for the repatriation of money like that? Good question, Mark.
India is considering this right now, what's called an amnesty. If you bring your money back, we will charge a small tax on it, and we won't ask questions how you got it out in the first place. The United States did this some years ago, and that brought back, the United States got back about $300 billion. The quid pro quo between government and the corporations that would bring the money back was that those corporations would invest the money in plant and equipment and hiring and so forth. They didn't do so. They used the money for bonuses, executive bonuses, and they used the money to make acquisitions of other companies. They did not spend that $300 billion on plant and equipment. Italy is hoping to get back some money. India is considering. I was just on a TV program 2 days ago saying I don't think it'll work for India. I think it's not a very effective way. In the first place, in the case of India, to bring that money back into India before you have established mechanisms to curtail its ongoing outflow just means that you're going to have it turning around and going right back out again. That makes no sense. The first thing to do is to establish the procedures that try to keep illicit money from flowing out of your country. I'm not real big on amnesty arrangements. I think they are problematic. We'll see whether Italy's works. The United States is currently considering another amnesty arrangement. I'm not sure whether that'll fly or not. The first one was not very successful.
Raymond, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today. Thank you.
Thank you.